This is the second of two videos about Odysseus' backstory. In the previous video, we looked at Odysseus' life up and until his arrival at Troy, so let's continue the story from there. Welcome to Ancient Classics. The Achaean expeditionary force arrives on Trojan shores and disembarks. Here is perhaps the time to focus on the description of Odysseus' contingent as described in the famous catalogue of ships from Book 2 of the Iliad. The events of the Iliad all take place in the final year at Troy, but the catalogue is perhaps some kind of narrative insert, so I'm going to include it here. But Odysseus led the great-souled Cephalanian, who held sway over Ithaca and lush-forested Neritos, and who dwelled in Crocylea and rugged Aiglypts, and those who held sway over Zakynthos and resided around Samos, and those who held sway on the mainland and lived on the facing shores. These Odysseus, a man equal to Zeus in his cunning, led, and 12 scarlet-painted ships had come with him. While at Troy, Odysseus made several diplomatic missions and covert operations into the city itself. Soon after the Achaean army disembarked, Odysseus accompanied Menelaus into Troy in a last-ditch and unsuccessful bid to negotiate the return of Menelaus' wife Helen before the siege of Troy commences. As related in the Kypria, the embassy turned sour, and Odysseus and Menelaus were assailed by the Trojans. But the Trojan Antenor somehow intervened and saved them. Now, we're just about to get into the Trojan War proper, but first, as a very quick point of context, in my previous video, I said a few words about how I feel about the notion of a canon outside a pop culture context. And those thoughts very much inform this video too. I also set some rules for myself. We're looking in this and the last video almost exclusively at pre-5th century sources, primarily the Iliad and the Odyssey, and also some of the surviving fragments and summaries of the epic cycle. Check out part 1 if you'd like to find out more. But on with the Trojan War. There's little record of what Odysseus, or indeed any of the Achaeans, did to pass the time during the 9 years from the commencement of the siege to the events of the Iliad. I guess those 9 years are really just a concocted number, a fluid gap of time, a placeholder into which we're just to imagine a load of battle filler. But things hot up for all of them in the final year, in which falls the events of the Iliad itself. The Iliad's narrative arc covers just a few days, from the insult done to Achilles through to his slaying of Hector and Hector's funeral. Odysseus plays a not insignificant supporting role throughout, and even has his own daring but brutal adventure beyond enemy lines. But I covered that in an earlier video on Odysseus in the Iliad. After the events of the Iliad, Achilles is shot dead by the Trojan prince Paris, aka Alexander, aided by the god Apollo. Odysseus, along with the hero Ajax or Aias, together retrieve Achilles' corpse and war gear from amidst the battle throng. Sources disagree as to precisely what role Ajax and Odysseus performed, but both Proclus, in his summary of the cyclic epic Aithiopis, and a scholiast state that it was Ajax who dragged Achilles' body back, while Odysseus afforded cover, fighting off the Trojans. Whatever happened, a bitter argument broke out between Odysseus and Ajax over the war gear of Achilles, or their respective claims to glory more generally. Somehow or other, this dispute escalates into a full-on breakdown, and Ajax descends into madness, randomly killing a load of sheep and then himself. His death, and indeed Odysseus' role in the events leading up to his death, it would seem was described by both the Aithiopis and another epic, the Little Iliad. But the full extent of the psychological horror is explored in later tragedies and epic, which are, of course, out of scope for this video. Then, as described in the Little Iliad, Odysseus captures the Trojan prophet Helenos, who prophesies that Troy will only fall once Philoctetes, the wounded Achaean abandoned on the island of Lemnos, possibly by Odysseus himself, is brought to rejoin his Achaean comrades and join the battle for Troy. Accordingly, Diomedes and possibly Odysseus too, although strictly this detail is omitted from the summary of the Little Iliad, sail off to fetch Philoctetes. Next, as also told in the Little Iliad, Odysseus goes off on another recruiting trip, sailing off to Skyros to fetch Achilles' brutal son Neoptolemus and to bring him to Troy. We're at the very final stages now, and the Trojan horse is already under construction. Odysseus disguises himself as a beggar, which seems to be his modus operandi, and enters Troy. He is recognized by Helen, and according to the Little Iliad, he even discusses plans for the taking of Troy with her. His cover is blown, I guess, because he's used his shitty beggar disguise just one too many times, and Odysseus has to fight his way back to the Achaean camp. Helen herself would recall this very meeting, or perhaps another like it, to Odysseus' son Telemachus in Book 4 of the Odyssey. But still, Odysseus is not quite done with his secret little missions. He and his pal Diomedes go off on one last daring raid into Troy, stealing the protective statue of Athena, the Palladian. All is now set for Odysseus' greatest wartime exploit, the Trojan Horse. We all know the story, and it's recounted twice, if I recall correctly, in the Odyssey, and featured in both the Little Iliad and the sack of Troy or Iliou Persis in the epic cycle. According to Proclus' summary of the Little Iliad, they put the leading heroes into the wooden horse. The rest of the Greek burn their huts and withdraw to Tenedos. The Trojans, believing themselves rid of their troubles, take the wooden horse into the city by breaching a portion of the wall and start celebrating their supposed victory over the Greeks. And we all know what happens next. Now, most traditions imply that the Trojan horse was Odysseus' brainchild, and that would seem fitting. But let's just test that, shall we? From what I know, the key passage from our period attributing the horse as Odysseus' own idea comes from Book 8 of the Odyssey, at the court of the Phaeacians. The tale is told by the court bard Demodocus, but at Odysseus' own request, who says, "Come on, let's have a change of theme. Tell us about the construction of the wooden horse. The one that Epeios made with Athene's help, which once glorious Odysseus led to the citadel as a trap after filling it full of men who would have destroyed Troy." So I think we're invited to take Odysseus' implied comment that the Trojan horse was all his idea with something of a pinch of salt. He certainly didn't build it himself. That was Epeios with Athene's help. Is Odysseus just a little bit jealous that his goddess should turn her attentions to another man? Is Odysseus kind of stealing Epeios' thunder? Just a little bit. The Trojan horse and the final hours of Troy is also told by the cyclic epic, the Iliou Persis, the sack of Troy, which also tells us that it was Odysseus who killed baby Astyanax, the child of Hector and Andromache, throwing him from the walls of Troy, although other accounts, including the Little Iliad, attribute the murder to Achilles' son, Neoptolemus. And that, as far as I'm aware, is the entire backstory of Odysseus leading up to the returns of the Achaean army from Troy, the narrative time frame of the Odyssey itself. Though sure, technically the action of the Odyssey commences just prior to Odysseus' return 10 years after the war, with his adventures and travails being described through flashbacks and inset narratives, but hey, like I say, I've limited myself here to the archaic, pre-5th century sources, though if I'm going to be pedantic about it, my actual sources are much later summaries rather than the original texts themselves, which are practically non-existent. So it's been a bit of an artificial scope, but hey. But I think I've learnt something, at least, from trying to stick to my pre-5th century scope. When I was revisiting the cyclic epic summaries, extracting all the mentions of Odysseus, I kept having to fight against my own preconceptions of the character, informed by later versions, and I found it sometimes very difficult to distinguish the two. Often I found myself misattributing certain plots, schemes, and manipulations to Odysseus, reading them into the texts where on the face of it there was no evidence. I think I've cut out all those misattributions from my draft script, but some may still be there. Let me know if you've spotted any. Specifically, the treatment of Philoctetes, the guy who is bitten by a snake, left in agony on Lemnos, only to be fetched and cured when it suited the Achaeans 10 years later. In the later traditions, Odysseus plays a key role in both dumping and retrieving Philoctetes, painting Odysseus in a rather chilling light, but his role is not made clear in the cyclic sources. But that said, we are reliant on summaries for the cyclic epics, so perhaps Odysseus really did play a key role in the originals. It just goes to show how difficult it is to view any major character without our prejudices from later traditions interfering one way or another. But even bearing all that in mind, I can't help but sense Odysseus' shadow over some of the most psychologically darkest episodes of the Trojan War and the brutal manipulations of his fellow Achaeans. True, the texts are often silent as to Odysseus' presence or unclear as to the precise nature of his involvement, whether reluctant or otherwise. But whatever, even in the epic cycle, I just seem to feel that wherever something sinister is afoot, Odysseus is not too far away. But what do you think? Was Odysseus the subject of a centuries-long post-epic character assassination, starting perhaps with the insertion of the notorious Dolonaea, Book 10 of the Iliad, in which Odysseus kills the Trojan Dolon in cold blood and has to purge himself in the waters thereafter? That book is often considered to be a later insert. Or is everything reflective of a darkness that was already within the epic character of Odysseus? And what are your favourite Odysseus backstories, as built out in the subsequent tradition? Anyway, meantime, like and subscribe, and we'll be back soon with more Odyssey adjacent takes.